Okay, I thought I'd show you. Here's this skull again that we were looking at that has the bones all kind of marked. And this is so taking off the top half of it and looking down at it so you can see the foramen magnum there. Here you can see this is the outline of the sphenoid bone that we just talked about. It's kind of the outline of that bat or bird. And this little bit right here, this is the ethmoid bone, and that's the crista galli that's kind of sticking up there. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the kind of main bones of the cranium. So we'll start with the frontal bone. All right, this is where you're kind of right in front. You have one of these. It's covering your frontal lobe of your brain. And the only thing you have to know here is the supraorbital margin is right here and right here. So pretty easy, where you can see where the eyes would fit in, supraorbital margin. One other thing is you have to know the name of this suture. So hopefully you remember that. So I'll put this skull back together again. And so you can kind of see the frontal bone on this skull. And okay. So here's the skull again that has all the colors. And you can see this is, here's the frontal bone up here above the eyes, comes around the side. And this suture right here, this is the coronal suture that's on the back of the frontal bone. All right, then is the parietal bones. There's two of them here, and here you see here, parietal bone. They're kind of shaped like squares, kind of misshapen squares. You can see them right here. And you have to know the back, the lambdoidal suture. So this is the lambdoidal suture we talked about in class of the parietal bone. This is the coronal suture, which goes straight, and this is the sagittal suture, which comes right down the middle, the sagittal suture. All right. Your lab notes mention Wormian bone, and those are just those excess bones that you see sometimes on skulls. They're not necessarily part of the parietal bone. Here I'll show a parietal bone kind of by itself. All right, so here's kind of a parietal bone, and you see here it looks kind of square. The part that's less, this part looks really sutury, and this part that looks less sutury is called the squamosal suture, and this is the part that's going to be right down here. This is the squamosal suture. I forgot to mention that one. It's where it connects up with the temporal bone beneath it. So that one looks kind of not so sutury. And then you can usually tell which one's lambdoidal and which one's coronal. The coronal one goes kind of more straight. So here I have two guys, and I know this part is the squamosal, the part on the bottom, that's easy to see. So this has got to be the sagittal on the top where they would meet. And then you have to figure out what's the coronal and what's the lambdoidal. And the coronal is more kind of right angle-y, like you can kind of see. This bottom part, this part right here is the coronal suture that goes in the front. And this one is more, I'll turn it around and kind of show you. The lambdoidal suture is more like a L-shaped, upside down L. So this suture right here is the lambdoidal suture of the parietal bone. Then we have the occipital bone. So on this skull, here we go. Occipital bone is in the back. It's this kind of, you see, going down here, going up here, and then going in the back. Right, so this is kind of going to be this back bone. It's by itself. And you can kind of see on one side, here's, it would be foramen magnum going through here. There's two bumps here. These are the occipital condyles, and they sit right on top of your vertebrae, your first vertebrae, which is your atlas. And what part of the atlas? The facet for the occiput. Yes, the facet for the occiput. Okay, so that's there's little bumps here. I hope you can kind of see them, right? And then if you turn inside, besides the foramen magnum, the only thing you're going to have to know is there's kind of smooth surfaces here, little indentations. This is the cerebellar fossa. So that is where the cerebellum sits. Here, I'll show you on this model. So here's the cerebellar fossa down here, and on this side, can't see, they don't work so, they're not so obvious here, but here's the occipital condyles right here. They're little bumps. Condyles are always bumps. And lastly, the temporal bone. All right. So the temporal bone on this guy, well, we've lost a little bit of it because there's a little bit above that you would see. All right, so there's a little bit of the temporal bone there at the top here, right here. Then it comes down here, so this is part of it, part of what we think of as our cheekbone, part of the zygomatic arch. It comes back here where we have our mastoid process. It includes the styloid process right there. It includes the hole that's going to go in your external auditory meatus, going in your ear, and then it kind of goes a little bit right here. We're going to talk about this structure right here. So let me get a temporal bone for you to see, a couple temporal bones. Okay, so here, this again is the zygomatic process. This is, so a temporal bone has a bunch of portions, things called portions, and they're just different areas of it. And I showed you this in your lecture. This is the squamous portion, and squamous means flat. And you can see it's quite flat, actually. Just that one part of it is a very kind, it looks round, but here when you see it this way, you see it's very flat. All right, so that's the squamous portion. So if you're kind of looking at the temporal bone right next to the zygomatic part or zygomatic process down here, and then kind of all this back part is called the mastoid portion, and it has the mastoid process on it. This is supposed to be the styloid process. You can hardly see it. It's not very good. Right, it's better in this one. Here you can see that sharp styloid process. So this is the kind of the mastoid portion. This is the styloid process. I don't even know if the styloid, I think it's probably part of the mastoid portion. This is the squamous portion that's flat, and there's a little bit up here that we've cut off. Here's the zygomatic arch. Here's that external auditory meatus. So that's going, the ear canal is going to be going down there. And then and then here is called the mandibular fossa. So right in here, remember fossa is always an indentation. I can kind of feel it in both sides. And the mandible is going to sit right in there. That's kind of where you stick the mandible. Yeah. So right there, you see where the mandible kind of articulates right in here. It's going to be the mandibular fossa. All right. Then then usually they call the tympanic, right where this external auditory meatus is, just kind of around that is called the tympanic portion. And then this is one you couldn't see in lecture, so it's good to see. So this is from the outside view, this is what you would see. If you turn it around, there's kind of this big, it's almost like you can hold it as a handle, but it's like a big, it's kind of, I don't know, boxy shaped, rectangular, bit of a rectangular shape. I'm going to try to turn it around so you can see it in various ways. It's just kind of a big bulky thing coming out the medial side. So here's another one. It's coming in the medial side. And that's the petrous portion. So in that are your semicircular canals, your cochlea. So kind of all the inner ear stuff is in this petrous portion of the temporal bone. And that's it.